Ellis Reeves had never wanted to play the hero. After 15 years of being the only human botanist on the Galactic Alliance's premier cadet training station, he learned that keeping your head down was the best survival strategy. Let the seven-limbed Viridians handle the emergencies. They had enough appendages for multitasking. Let the telepathic Nor twins coordinate rescue efforts. They could literally think in unison. Ellis? He just wanted to tend his plants and count the days until his contract expired. Talk to your specimens all you want, Reeves. Ellis muttered to himself in a mocking tone, mimicking Commander Pelvash's gravelly voice. But don't forget to file your nutrient consumption reports in triplicate. The Botanical Sciences Bay was Ellis's sanctuary, the only place on orbital station Kythera where he didn't feel like the evolutionary equivalent of a flip phone at a quantum computing convention. His lab was cluttered with aquatic plant specimens from 17 different worlds, each carefully maintained in transparent cultivation tanks that lined the curved walls. The air was thick with humidity and smelled like pond water, which most station inhabitants found repulsive. Ellis found it comforting. His pride and joy was a 20-gallon tank containing several species of algae from Earth's oceans, primitive by galactic standards, but fascinating to Ellis. While other worlds had developed photosynthetic organisms that could convert radiation into complex proteins or manipulate gravitational fields, Earth's humble algae still used the old-fashioned method: carbon dioxide in, oxygen out. A soft chime from his wrist communicator interrupted his thoughts. "Dr. Reeves?" The voice belonged to Trill, one of the station's newer cadets, a Cenofian with auditory sensory organs so sensitive she could hear cellular division. "Commander Pelvash requests your presence in Training Module 6. Ellis sighed. "Why me?" He specifically asked for the human plant enthusiast. His words, not mine. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. He said immediately, sir. Of course he did. Ellis grabbed his tablet and reluctantly headed for the transit tube. Training Module 6 was the Underwater Combat Simulation Chamber, a massive spherical tank where cadets from aquatic worlds trained for zero-gravity rescue operations. Why they needed a botanist was beyond him. The station corridors were unusually empty. Typically, they would be bustling with cadets from across the galaxy, each species more bizarre than the last. Ellis had stopped being impressed by alien physiology about 13 years ago. When you've seen a crystalline entity debate philosophy with a sentient gas cloud, the wonder wears off. As Ellis approached Training Module 6, the emergency containment doors slammed shut behind him with a pneumatic hiss. Red warning lights bathed the corridor in an ominous glow. "That can't be good," he muttered. Commander Pelvash's voice crackled over the intercom. "Reeves, get in here now." Ellis pressed his palm against the biometric scanner, and the doors to the observation deck slid open. The scene inside made his stomach drop. Pelvash, a 9-foot-tall Arkelian with chitinous armor and compound eyes, was frantically working the control panel. Through the reinforced viewport, Ellis could see the massive training tank where 24 cadets of various species were swimming in obvious distress. Some were pounding on the inner walls. "What's happening?" Ellis asked. "Life support malfunction," Pelvash replied without looking up. "The whole module is sealed off from station systems. Environmental controls, backup generators, emergency protocols, all offline. Can't you just drain the tank? Draining mechanisms are linked to the environmental systems. We're locked out completely." Ellis glanced at the status monitors. Oxygen levels in the tank were dropping rapidly. Some species could survive in low-oxygen environments, but not all of them. How long do they have? For some, maybe 2 hours. For others, Pelvash's mandibles clicked nervously. Minutes. Evacuation pods? Also offline. Something's corrupted the entire system. The commander's compound eyes reflected the flashing emergency lights. The nearest assistance is 3 hours away. Ellis stared through the viewport at the panicking cadets. Among them was Trill, the Cenofian who had summoned him. Her gill-like structures were fluttering rapidly, a sign of distress. "Why call me? I'm not security or engineering." Pelvash finally turned to face him. "Because right now, we need something primitive." Ellis raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." The station's systems are too integrated, too advanced. This sabotage, and yes, I believe it is sabotage, has specifically targeted our life support redundancies. So, you need something so technologically backward that it wouldn't be affected by whatever is corrupting our systems. Pelvash's mandibles clicked in what Ellis had learned was the Arkelian equivalent of desperate hope. Something like your earth plants. Understanding dawned on Ellis. You want me to create an emergency oxygen supply using algae. Can you do it? Ellis laughed, a short, incredulous sound. You're joking. That would take days to... They don't have days. Ellis looked back at the tank. A young Meridian cadet, amphibian-like with translucent skin, was already showing signs of hypoxia, her movements becoming sluggish. I'll need to get to my lab, Ellis said, his mind already racing through possibilities. And I'll need help transporting equipment. Whatever you need. Just hurry. As they rushed through the corridors, Ellis's thoughts turned to the specimens in his lab. Most were too specialized, too slow-growing. But the algae from Earth's oceans, specifically the genetically modified strains he'd been cultivating as a side project, those might work. If he could rapidly accelerate their growth and photosynthesis rates. When they reached the Botanical Sciences Bay, Ellis immediately began gathering equipment. I need these 3 tanks moved to Training Module 6, he instructed the security officers who had accompanied them. Carefully. If those tanks crack, we lose everything. Commander Pelvash watched with growing impatience. How long will this take? Longer if you keep asking me that. Ellis snapped, surprising himself with his boldness. He'd never spoken to the commander that way before, but there wasn't time for protocol. Ellis grabbed containers of nutrients, growth accelerants, and specialized equipment. His hands moved with practiced precision despite the pressure. This was what he knew. This was what humans were good at. Making do with inadequate resources, finding solutions where none should exist. As they transported everything back to Training Module 6, Ellis noticed Pelvash giving him sidelong glances. What? Ellis asked. I've never seen you work with such intensity before. Ellis shrugged. Never had 24 cadets, depending on my pond scum before. Inside the observation deck, they quickly set up the equipment. Through the viewport, Ellis could see that several cadets were now floating motionless. Others were trying to help their struggling companions. Some of them are already unconscious, Pelvash said, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. Your primitive solution better work, human. Ellis ignored the jab and focused on the task at hand. Give me a direct line to the cadets. I need someone in there to help from the inside. As Pelvash established communication, Ellis stared at his algae tanks. These microscopic organisms were about to become the difference between life and death. Earth's primitive, backward biology against the cosmos. Just another day at the office, he muttered to himself, rolling up his sleeves. The communicator crackled to life, and a strained voice came through. This is Cadet Lyrics. We're losing people in here. Ellis leaned toward the speaker. Lyrics, I need you to help me. Can you make it to the maintenance panel on the north wall? Yes. Several of us can still move. Good. I need you to open it and find the environmental input valves. They should be color-coded blue. As the cadet followed instructions, Ellis worked frantically, combining his algae cultures into a single large tank and adding growth accelerants. The mixture turned a vibrant emerald green as the microscopic organisms responded to the treatment. I've found them, Lyrics reported. There should be an emergency bypass tube connected to the port marked auxiliary. Pelvash hovered nearby, mandibles twitching anxiously. Will this actually work? Even at accelerated growth rates, how can simple algae produce enough oxygen in time? Ellis didn't look up from his work. Because I've been experimenting with these strains for years. They're not just simple algae anymore. He inserted specialized nutrient tubes into the mixture. On Earth, we have a saying, necessity is the mother of terrible decisions that somehow work out. That's not how that saying goes, Pelvash said. Close enough. Through the viewport, Ellis could see several cadets working together to connect the bypass tube. Others were clustering around their unconscious comrades, using their own bodies to move them toward the center of the tank, where the oxygen concentration would soon be highest. Ellis finished the final connections on his end, creating a closed-loop system between his algae tank and the training module. Now we hope this works faster than it should. How much faster? Pelvash asked. About 10 times faster than any botanical science says is possible. Ellis smiled grimly. Good thing I don't always follow the rules. The commander's compound eyes narrowed. What exactly have you been doing in that lab of yours? Let's just say my research reports might have omitted some creative adjustments to Earth's natural biology. As the green mixture began flowing through the bypass system into the training module, Ellis monitored the readings on his tablet. The algae was already multiplying at an extraordinary rate, converting carbon dioxide into oxygen more efficiently than should have been possible. It's working, Ellis muttered, almost disbelieving his own readings. Oxygen levels are rising. Inside the tank, the cadets noticed the change almost immediately. Their movements became more coordinated, more purposeful. But one cadet, a tall, silver-skinned neosynth, swam to the viewport and made a slashing motion across their throat. What's that cadet doing? Palbaj demanda. Ellis frowned. Something's wrong. He activated the communicator again. Lyrics, what's happening? The oxygen is helping, but a fit of coughing interrupted the transmission. Something in the mixture, it's affecting some of us. The neosynthetics and Palladians, their respiratory systems are... The silver-skinned cadet pressed against the viewport, their face contorted in pain. Small bubbles were forming under their metallic skin. Ellis checked his readings again and cursed. The pH balance is off. The solution is too acidic for silicon-based life forms. He turned to Pelvash. The oxygen production is helping most of them, but it's poisoning others. Fix it, Pelvash ordered. It's not that simple. If I adjust the pH for the silicon-based cadets, the oxygen production will slow for everyone else. Through the viewport, they could see the training tank had become a scene of chaos. Most cadets were reviving, but a few were clearly suffering adverse effects. The choices were impossible. Sacrifice a few to save the many, or risk everyone while trying to save everyone. Ellis stared at his equipment, mind racing. This was exactly why he'd avoided responsibility for 15 years. Plants were predictable. People, regardless of their species, were not. Reeves, Pelvash's voice cut through his paralysis. Make a decision. Ellis looked up at the commander, then back at the cadets. Something the commander had said earlier came back to him. We need something primitive. I need direct access to the tank, Ellis said suddenly. That's impossible. The environmental seals. Not through the station systems. I need physical access. Give me a pressure suit. Pelvash hesitated, then barked orders into his communicator. Moments later, a junior officer arrived with an emergency EVA suit designed for hull breaches. As Ellis struggled into the bulky suit, Pelvash explained, there's a maintenance airlock. It hasn't been used in years, but it's manually operated. Perfect. What are you planning? The commander asked as they hurried down a narrow corridor. Something primitive. The manual airlock was little more than a glorified closet with 2 heavy doors and a hand pump. Ellis squeezed inside with a container of specialized nutrients and buffers. This is insane, Pelvash said, helping to seal Ellis's helmet. You're risking your life. Noted, Ellis replied. Now, close the door. Once sealed in, Ellis operated the manual pump, flooding the tiny chamber with water from the training tank. The pressure made his ears pop, even inside the suit. When the chamber was full, he opened the inner door and swam into the training module. The scene inside was worse than it had appeared from the observation deck. Some cadets were recovering, taking deep breaths of the oxygen-enriched water. Others, primarily the silicon-based species, were clustered together, their skin blistering from the acidic conditions. Ellis swam directly to them, his movements clumsy in the bulky suit. The silver-skinned cadet who had signaled the warning flinched away, clearly assuming this strange, suited figure meant more harm. Ellis held up his container of nutrients and buffers, making exaggerated mixing motions. The cadets seemed to understand and nodded weakly. Working quickly, Ellis released measured amounts of the buffer solution directly around the silicon-based cadets. It wouldn't fix the entire tank. That would require too much solution and would compromise the oxygen production, but could create microenvironments where these cadets could breathe safely. As the buffers dispersed, forming protective pockets of neutralized water, the affected cadets began to recover. Their blistered skins slowly smoothed, and their movements became less pained. Ellis's oxygen gauge beeped a warning. 15 minutes of air left. He needed to exit soon, but first he swam to Cadet Lyrics, who was coordinating the other cadets. Through the glass of his helmet, Ellis mouthed words and used hand gestures to explain what he'd done. Lyrics nodded and made a series of fluid hand signals to the other cadets. With his air running low, Ellis returned to the airlock, cycling through and returning to the corridor where Pelvash waited. "They're stabilizing," Ellis gasped as he removed his helmet. The localized buffers should protect the silicon-based cadets until help arrives. That was... Pelvash seemed at a loss for words. Incredibly reckless. And effective. Ellis managed a weak smile. That's humanity in a nutshell. For the next hour, they monitored the cadets closely. The oxygen levels continued to rise, and even the most severely affected cadets were recovering. When the rescue ships finally arrived and proper life support was restored, all 24 cadets were alive. As the medical teams treated the cadets, Commander Pelvash found Ellis sitting alone in the empty observation deck, staring at his algae tank. "The saboteur has been identified," Pelvash said. "A disgruntled maintenance worker. He never imagined anyone would bypass the entire system with pond scum." Ellis chuckled tiredly. Primitive solutions have their uses. Indeed, the commander sat beside him, his massive frame making the standard chair look like dollhouse furniture. "You know, in 15 years, I've never really understood why the Alliance insisted on keeping a human botanist on staff. And now I understand that sometimes evolution takes different paths to the same destination. Our technology may be more advanced, but your species has a particular resourcefulness." Ellis nodded. "We're pretty good at making do. The cadets are asking for you, particularly the neosynthetics. I believe they want to express their gratitude." "In a minute," Ellis said, watching the swirling green life in his tank. "I'm just appreciating the irony." "What irony?" Ellis gestured toward the algae. "These organisms are among the oldest life forms on Earth. 3 billion years of evolutionary history. They were producing oxygen before any of our species had even evolved. Ancient primitive life saving the most advanced beings in the galaxy. Bulbash mandiblas klika tutfi. Perhaps primitive is not the correct term." "No," Ellis agreed. "Just different adaptations to different challenges." He stood up, stretching his tired muscles. "Speaking of adaptations, I think I'm due for a reassignment." "Oh, yeah, somewhere with more emergencies. Turns out I don't mind playing the hero every now and then." As they walked toward the medical bay where the cadets were recovering, Ellis noticed something unusual. Pelvash was walking slightly behind him, a sign of respect in Arkelian culture that had never before been extended to him. "Commander," Ellis said, pausing at the doorway. "I've been meaning to ask, when you said you needed something primitive, was that a compliment or an insult?" Pelvash's compound eyes glinted with what might have been amusement. "At the time, an insult." The tall alien gestured toward the recovering cadets. "Now, I believe the correct human phrase is highest praise." Ellis smiled. Maybe being the evolutionary equivalent of a flip phone had its advantages after all.